Helen, tell us what you have really managed to glean from all this.
Thank you, Rich. I would say that this set of number was not, to a large extent, any surprise. In particular, I would say IP returning positive, I think is largely expected. And in fact, the number is slightly better than we originally expected at 3.9%. So I would say in particular, when you look at it, including the PC and IT-related equipment manufacturing, the machineries and the equipment, and generally even the auto manufacturing have been really beating expectations. So that's, I think, is really the positive news. And I would say that on the back of all these reopening and the diminishing impact from the shockwave of supply hits, I would say this is a reasonably solid set of numbers. But of course, I think the bad news comes from the retail sales, and the very number that came in at a minus 7.5% was below our expectation as well as consensus. And in fact, if you look at the breakdown, it is actually very much consistent with people's fear, which is dining component is down by a big margin, more than 30%. But if you look at the grocery shopping in physical stores and also online, it actually has been growing pretty well. So that, I think, have been very much the hope that people were getting so far, which is gradually we could see some improvement as people go back to restaurants and the hotels and start to travel again. But at the moment, this set of numbers are still suggesting that we're early in that game. Investment-wise, I would say that it's not too bad. Actually for a single month, this number is roughly estimated at about 0.8%. So in particular, I would say construction of housing, especially residential housing, has been pretty positive. So that's a definitely.
Well, in this news conference taking place, this briefing from the National Bureau of Statistics, NBS, they've highlighted unemployment being a challenge, but we only saw a small uptick. So are you in the camp that's is saying that if they're highlighting it, it's probably not really reflecting what's going on the ground? And it does seem a bit hard to believe that when we've seen how people have been locked down, how unemployment in other parts of the world has rocketed as a result of these lockdowns, that China's only upticked by 0.2 percentage points. Helen?
Yeah, that's a very good point, Rich, you just made. In fact, I would say that we are afraid that this surveyed unemployment rate will continue to climb, especially towards the end of second quarter. After all, with a very large graduating class coming through, more than 8 million college students, I'm afraid that at the moment, the pace of new job creation is not necessarily going to put us in a comfortable place anytime soon. And therefore, we are expecting this rate to go up towards 7%, at least in 2 months. So there is going to be another jump. For each percentage point, that's 4.5 million people, being jobless. And therefore, I would say that this, first of all, is on an upward trend. And secondly, definitely there could be some understatement. And however, we need to be aware of the fact that to a large extent, at the moment, there are some renegotiations between the employers and employees in a big part of China. So there could be some pay cuts so as to reduce the overall layoff demand, and therefore we probably wouldn't see a jump to tens of millions right away. But the cost is basically that there is a widespread income loss across the board. So you probably would see that also later on coming into domestic demand, especially consumption.
Helen, we talk about a Chinese economy that is on the mend. To what extent can supply shocks stand in the way of this recovery, given that 70% of what China imports is used for production, and there's so much uncertainty from those supply markets, the likes of Korea, the U.S., even Germany?
Right. I would say that the import is indeed a big part of a reflection of the demand weakness. It's part of that is processing trade, as you were suggesting, and part of that obviously is also related to the weaker investment and also consumption demand from China itself. So if you look at the April data at minus 14.2%, I would say that imports was in particularly showing that the demand weakness is already weighing on China. But I would say that in particular at the moment the going forward we still see further downside because of the for example trade weakness, given that it's global lockdowns almost everywhere. So for the next 2 to 3 months it's probably hard to see the external demand coming back, and therefore other than PCs, tablets, and also the medical supplies that have done well in exports, China probably will see also the potential losses in many of the export orders, and therefore the demand for its processing trade components in its imports would also weaken. At the same time, as we said, Rich was already suggesting that the labor market pressure would come in various forms, be it as job losses or income losses, and we do think that this would largely weigh on overall China consumption demand. So we are very much hoping for the policy easing to step up in the near future, especially around the MPC time, which will start next Friday, and we could see some fiscal stimulus so that especially to help with the SMEs to keep jobs, and also the low-income families to really keep their living standard. So we think that this would probably be largely needed, especially in the second quarter, as there is a gap between when the hit comes and also when the biggest impact will show up in the numbers. And we don't necessarily want to sit on our hands for too long. Yep.
Right, and you talk about policy support. The question really is, how aggressive will the PBOC be? So far, it hasn't shown any signs of being aggressive, and the market's wanting it to be so.
You're right. I'm afraid that compared to other major central banks, the PBOC has not been the most active so far in terms of using easing tools. But I would say that it's definitely picking up the pace a bit, probably because that starting from mid-April, by the time that the official data from first quarter and March became available, I think the policymakers are definitely intensifying their easing measures. For example, from February to mid-April, for 2 months' time, they only cut LPR by 10 basis points. Yes, interbank rates were a little bit lower, but generally speaking, 10 basis points of a cut in policy rate is compared to, for example, what the Fed and also especially other regional central banks has done, is very little. But since then, interestingly, in mid-April, they have cut another 20 basis points, and we do think that they have 70 more basis points to go before the end of this year. Generally speaking, we think that the PBOC has gradually come towards to admit the very fact that there has to be more policy easing, and especially in its more recent monetary policy report of the first quarter, we definitely see their resistance against releveraging coming off. So that's a good sign.